I also want to thank you folks, our affiliates in radio, many of our friends here and colleagues at Fox and elsewhere. My new book, The Democrat Party Hates America, #1 on the New York Times bestseller list for hardcover nonfiction, hardcover, and ebook nonfiction. That's thanks to you, not thanks to me. I do notice the other networks and media outlets are pushing the hell out of another book that is a gossip book, trashing President Trump. And that book will be a flash in the pan. They always are, but they always want to do their digs and their digs and their digs. I don't write books about myself, and I don't write books about other individuals. I write books about what I fear is happening in this country, and also what I think is strong and right and great about this country. In other words, books that are intended to inform the people so people can make up their own minds. And that is The Democrat Party Hates America. And in that, I want to discuss specifically, like a laser, this issue of immigration. Now, I can't cover it all in the short period of time that I have here. But I want to quote for you in my book a former governor of Colorado, a liberal governor by the name of Dick Lamb. He's deceased since. But in 2004, he gave a speech in Washington, D.C. that he wasn't expected to give. And it's about immigration. It's about how you destroy a country. And I want to read this to you. It's short and crucial. And this is how the Democrats used to think. He said, if you believe that America is too smug, too self-satisfied, too rich, then let's destroy America. It's not that hard to do. No nation in history has survived the ravages of time. First, turn America into a bilingual or multilingual and bicultural country. History shows that no nation can survive the tension, conflict, and antagonism of two or more competing languages and cultures. It is a blessing for an individual to be bilingual. However, it is a curse for a society to be bilingual. The historical scholar Seymour Lipset put it this way: the histories of bilingual and bicultural societies that do not assimilate are histories of turmoil, tension, and tragedy. Canada, Belgium, Malaysia, Lebanon all face crises of national existence in which minorities press for autonomy, if not independence. Pakistan and Cyprus have divided. Nigeria suppressed an ethnic rebellion. France faces difficulties with Basques, and so forth. What Dick Lamb did here is he laid out a case that you destroy America by destroying its culture, by destroying its language, by destroying the civil society. That is precisely what's taking place in this country at the hands of Joe Biden and the Democrat Party. I don't want to hear about the mayor of New York City. He's a little late to the scene. I don't want to hear about the governor. I don't want to hear about disparate members of Congress here and there who don't lay the blame where it belongs in the Biden regime. This is an obvious effort to destroy the culture of the United States and the civil society of the United States. Now, 7.6 million illegal aliens in America. Should Biden serve one term, and not more, God willing, he will have allowed 10 to 11 million illegal aliens into this country. 10 to 11 million illegal aliens. That's the population of Massachusetts. And he will forever change the country. Now, Dick Lamb wasn't the only one. Jefferson talked about it. Hamilton talked about it. Washington talked about it. None of them were completely opposed to immigration, but they make the point that you have to assimilate into a society. It has to be a managed process. That you can't represent every culture on the face of the earth in your own country. That, first of all, the purpose of immigration is to improve the existing country and to do so in support of the current citizenry. Our representatives, our president, are supposed to represent we the people, meaning the citizens of the United States, not the quote-unquote citizens of the world. Can you name one society that has survived open borders and literally millions and millions of foreigners coming into their country? There are no background checks effectively going on in America. We don't even control our own border anymore. We've turned it over to the drug cartels, the murderous, heinous drug cartels in Mexico. They now have a presence in every major city in every state in the union. And they're killing us. They're destroying our youth. They're destroying our economy. Our school districts can't handle this. Our hospitals can't handle this. Law enforcement can't handle this. Not only is the border wide open, Joe Biden is processing as many illegal aliens as possible. And so in doing that, they cut corners. What does that mean? People are not being vetted. What else is Joe Biden doing? Joe Biden has no idea where tens of thousands of migrant children are. His Department of HHS has been told, process them as fast as you can, basically give them to any adults who claim them, because they're on a fast track to do what? To integrate the illegal aliens into our society, to make them sort of quasi-citizens, and he's issuing essentially amnesty to each and every one of them. We have a parole system, without getting into the weeds, which is handled on a very limited basis in the past. He has used this as a separate track for hundreds of thousands of illegal aliens to basically become normalized in this country. They're handing out hundreds of thousands of work permits to people who should be deported in this country. Hundreds of thousands of permits. And now they're thinking about TSA issuing federal identification cards. So people become essentially permanent in this country. And then we hear about DACA. DACA is an illegal law. It was put in place by Obama and Biden illegally. We have a federal judge in Texas who says it's illegal. And so now the question's always, well, what are you going to do about it? There's the children of illegal aliens. It's amazing, isn't it? That the Democrat Party entertains all these illegal activities, and then they throw it in our lap. What are we supposed to do about it? What are we supposed to do about it? First of all, you got to shut the damn border. How come so many other countries can do it, but we can't? The answer is we can. We can. They are destroying the country. Now, when people come into the country, they're supposed to be assimilated into our culture, assimilated into our society. Don't we love the American culture? Don't we love the American society? Don't we love our founding document? Don't we love our Constitution? Don't we love our language? People want to come into America. They're supposed to embrace all these things. They're supposed to have an allegiance to America. You have people crossing the border who are planting flags on the islands, Colombian flags, Mexican flags. What is this? Those are the islands that belong to Texas in the middle of the river. Ladies and gentlemen, with citizenship comes responsibility. And so all these illegal aliens who are coming in, they have no responsibility to this country. They have no allegiance, no ties to this country. Many of them are illiterate in their own language. We have no idea what kind of diseases they're bringing into this country. And then on the other side of the border, we do know that women are being repeatedly abused and raped. Children are being lost. Children are being sent into this country. They don't have parents. They don't have homes. What are we doing with them? The Biden administration's pushing them out into the public. We have tens of thousands of teenagers, illegal immigrants, who are working in the underground economy, who are being abused. We have tens of thousands of infant children. You talk about being caged, who are being caged. And then the first adult who essentially claims ownership gets the kid, and that's why we now have this massive problem of kids being sold into sex slavery. What kind of a man is Joe Biden? Not to allow this, to be doing this. What kind of a woman is Kamala Harris, who hasn't spent a minute seriously on the border? What kind of people run the Democrat Party that would allow this to happen to American citizens, to citizens from other countries, to our border? What is their game here? Their game is they hate the country. Why are they making us energy dependent on Saudi Arabia and other countries when we're energy independent? Why are they making us dependent on the communist Chinese for rare minerals for their electric vehicle obsession? I mean, they talk about globalism. They're not kidding. They're selling this country one piece at a time to one tyranny, to one genocidal maniac after another. And they hate the country. Ask them. Ask them, how was the country founded? Oh, by white supremacists. Oh, really? And the Constitution? Oh, that's white supremacy too. Oh, and the Declaration? Oh, we never liked the Declaration. That's too limiting on what we can think and do in a society, a more perfect society. And they rewrite our history. The 1619 Project has nothing to do with American history. Zero. Critical race theory is a complete Marxist lie about the nature of the population in this country. Now they don't even believe we should be a colorblind society. We should resegregate society, don't you know? And, of course, the government, public schools are the government. And teachers, they're government employees. They should come between parents and their children, just as Marx insisted. This is going on all over the country. This is what I want to see from Republican debates, not what do they think about the LGBT community, or their concern about child care, or the concern about health care, and so forth and so on. We're losing our country. If we want to turn to Ronald Reagan, and I think we should, then we should talk like Reagan, think like Reagan, believe like Reagan. Now, that said, at least House Republicans appear to be taking a stand on the issue of immigration. They're saying, hey, look, we insist that this immigration issue be addressed. We're beyond an emergency situation. This isn't even immigration. It is planned invasion. It's a planned invasion by foreign countries who are sending their people here, who are allowing their people to come here, and by Joe Biden. They're cutting the razor wire on the border that the Texans put there. The federal government's cutting the wires. They're letting people into the country. Some of the adult males, many of whom are adult males, are saying, okay, what do we do now? Have you seen that video? And what do they say? What is the Border Patrol forced to say? You're free to go. Just go. You are watching the destruction of America. This is just one little area, but you are watching the destruction of America. I'm glad the Republicans at least seem to be standing up to this, from Speaker McCarthy to Chip Roy to most of the others. And we'll be right back.
Hey, Sean Hannity here. Hey, click here to subscribe to Fox News YouTube page and catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis. You will not get it anywhere else.